At the beginning of a relationship, everything feels light and full of possibility. The energy is electric, texts are constant, plans are exciting, and you can almost feel the momentum pulling you closer. But just when you think things are starting to become solid, something shifts. His energy changes. He gets a little quieter. There's a delay in the way he responds. The enthusiasm isn't what it was a few days ago. It feels like someone took their foot off the gas without telling you why, and you're left wondering what's happening. Most women assume they've done something wrong. Maybe you said too much, maybe you came on too strong, maybe you didn't text back fast enough, or maybe you texted too much. You start overanalyzing everything, but what you don't realize is that you may have just entered a phase that almost every man, consciously or not, puts a woman through before he truly decides to commit. It's not written down. He may not even be aware he's doing it, but it happens. And it's this test doesn't involve a checklist. There's no scorecard. It's emotional, subtle, and often very confusing if you're not aware of what's happening. A man, before he makes that leap into real emotional vulnerability, needs to know if it's safe. If you're someone he can open up to without fearing that he'll lose himself, or worse, get judged, manipulated, or trapped. But here's the twist: he doesn't test you by asking deep questions or having long, vulnerable conversations. Most of the time, the way he tests you is by pulling away. Why? Because when everything is going great, when you're laughing, vibing, and texting all day, you're showing your best self, and so is he. Everyone is showing the polished version. But that's not the real test of compatibility. The real test happens when things aren't going perfectly, when he needs space, when he gets a little distant, when he stops putting in 100% effort. That's when he observes. He's not doing it to be manipulative. It's almost instinctive. He's watching how you react. Do you become anxious? Do you start chasing him for validation? Do you try to fix something that might not even be broken? Or do you remain composed, confident, and grounded in your self-worth? He wants to know, can this woman hold herself steady when the emotional high fades? That's the He's asking, can I trust her not to lose herself when I show my messy side? This isn't about playing hard to get or manipulating emotions. It's deeper than that. At the core, a man is trying to assess if the connection you're building is strong enough to weather the parts of himself that aren't so easy to love. The fears, the confusion, the emotional inconsistency that sometimes shows up, not because he's a bad person, but because he's human. And it's important to understand that this phase of emotional testing isn't about passing or failing in the conventional sense. It's about showing up authentically without chasing or shrinking. Most women fail this test, not because they're not worthy, but because they don't realize they're being tested in the first place. So when he pulls back, they panic, they overcompensate. They try to earn his attention again by being overly accommodating, hyper-available, or emotionally intense. They make his distance about their inadequacy instead of seeing it as a moment of observation. And the moment they start performing instead of just being, he notices. The test doesn't say, will she fight for me? It says, will she betray herself to keep me? Because if she does, that's not strength. That's fear, and he won't commit to fear. He'll commit to a woman who shows she can hold her own even when he's uncertain. He needs to know that your emotions don't depend entirely on his behavior, that your day isn't ruined if he hasn't texted, that you aren't living in a state of emotional instability just because he's figuring himself out. That's where the real power lies. Ironically, the less you try to control his actions, the more control you actually gain over the outcome. Because when a man sees that you aren't desperately trying to manage the connection, when you give him space without chasing, when you stay present without pressure, he starts to see you differently. You're no longer just someone he's attracted to. You're someone he respects, someone who commands his emotional presence, not with fear or drama, but with calm certainty. This test might look like ghosting for a day or two. It might look like him canceling plans last minute. It might come in the form of emotional withdrawal, right after a moment of closeness. You'll recognize it when you feel confused, when the emotional temperature suddenly drops. That's your cue. That's the point where you either start reacting or start responding. Reacting is fueled by fear, fear of abandonment, fear of rejection, fear of loss. Responding, on the other hand, is fueled by clarity. The woman who responds knows who she is. She doesn't jump into anxious overdrive, she doesn't demand answers or try to force closeness. She lets things unfold, she's aware of the test, but she doesn't treat it like a game. She knows that true connection requires honesty, not performance. And here's what often happens next: when he sees that you don't crack under pressure, that you don't go from confident to needy the moment he backs off, something clicks. He realizes he doesn't have to carry the whole emotional load. He doesn't have to be perfect to be loved. That's when he starts leaning back in, not because you begged him to, not because you proved your worth, but because your self-worth created a space where real intimacy can grow. That's what the test is for. It's not about tricking you, it's about revealing you. He wants to see if the woman who smiled so brightly on date 3 is the same woman who holds steady when things aren't quite so smooth. He wants to know if you can handle the real parts of him, not just the highlight reel. The women who pass this test aren't the loudest, or the most available, or the ones who bend the most. They're the ones who know their value, even when someone else forgets it for a moment. They're the ones who stay rooted when someone else is swaying. And that energy, that's what draws a man to commit, not out of fear of losing her but out of recognition that he's found something rare. When a man begins to pull away, many women feel an instinct to do more, to close the gap, to re-engage the emotional intensity, to reassure him of their value. It's completely understandable. When we feel someone slipping away, we want to pull them close. But what most women don't realize is that this moment isn't about chasing, fixing, or convincing. It's about something much deeper. This isn't a test of how badly you want him. It's a test of whether you can stay centered, secure, and calm in the face of uncertainty. That's what he's paying attention to, even if he doesn't consciously realize it. The moment a man starts to shift his energy, less attention, less consistency, shorter replies, it triggers emotional alarms in many women. And without realizing it, they shift from being present and grounded to being reactive. They ask more questions, double text, initiate more frequently, offer reassurances that were never asked for, or start adjusting their behavior in small ways just to avoid losing him. But none of these actions actually bring him closer. In fact, they often push him further away, not because you're doing something wrong, but because the energy behind these behaviors is not attractive. It's anxious. It's about trying to control the connection, and that control repels rather than attracts. Here's what makes the difference. It's not how much effort you give when things are easy, it's how steady you remain when things feel hard. A man doesn't need you to chase him. He needs to know you won't lose yourself in the moments where he's temporarily lost in his own head. Can you hold space for him while still holding on to yourself? That's the quiet question he's asking. This moment is not about pursuing, it's about your emotional posture. The man who tests you with distance isn't asking, will she fight for me? He's asking, can she handle not being in control? Because relationships will have those moments, times when life gets heavy, or feelings get complicated, or doubts creep in. What makes someone a safe emotional partner isn't just how fun and exciting they are during the highs, it's how grounded and clear they stay during the lows. The second you begin to perform or adjust your truth in order to keep him interested, something inside you shifts. You stop being yourself and start being someone shaped by fear. You give up your natural rhythm and start dancing to a beat you think he wants to hear. You start acting from a place of scarcity, and that's when the dynamic starts to erode. Because no one falls in love with someone who looks afraid to lose them. They fall in love with someone who knows they're enough, whether or not someone else can see it in that moment. When a man pulls back, most women interpret it as a sign that they need to do something to fix it. They think, maybe he's losing interest, I need to show him how much I care, I need to prove that I'm the one. But love doesn't come from proof, it comes from presence. When you stay calm in that space of emotional distance, when you continue being your full self, showing up for your life, staying true to your worth, it communicates something incredibly powerful. I'm not defined by your uncertainty. That's not coldness, that's clarity. A lot of people confuse confidence with detachment, but they're not the same. Detachment says I don't care what you do. Confidence says I care but I won't lose myself over your decision. Confidence is the quiet, grounded energy that says I'm here if you want to connect, but I won't chase connection at the cost of my peace. And that's exactly what creates the space for a man to come close. When he sees that you're not panicking, that you're not drowning in neediness, that you're not trying to force him to stay, that's when the pressure disappears. That's when he starts to feel drawn back, not because you demanded it, but because your calm created the safety his nervous system needed to process his own emotions. In those moments of distance, the secure woman doesn't try to win him, she doesn't compete with other women in his life, or overanalyze his every word. She focuses on her own energy. She knows her worth isn't up for debate. She understands that attraction isn't sustained by trying harder, it's sustained by staying connected to herself. She doesn't beg for clarity, she gives herself clarity. She doesn't search for reassurance, she gives herself reassurance. And that's the kind of woman a man looks at and thinks, she doesn't need me to complete her, but I want to be close to her. The real test is this: when he's unsure, will you become unsure too? Or will you stay steady in yourself? Because love isn't always about intense passion. Sometimes it's about emotional regulation, about being the eye of the storm rather than getting swept up in it. And this isn't about pretending to be fine or playing it cool, it's not about faking indifference, it's about actually being okay. Knowing that someone pulling away doesn't mean you're less worthy, it doesn't mean something is wrong with you, it just means he's processing something, and whether or not he comes back is not what defines your value. Your emotional independence is everything. It's what keeps you from handing over your peace just because someone else is uncertain. It's what allows you to remain in your feminine energy, not by overextending or over-explaining, but by receiving clarity instead of chasing it. When a man pulls back, he doesn't want pressure, he wants space, but not space so he can run away, space so he can see clearly, so he can figure out what he feels, without being overwhelmed by yours. If you keep inserting yourself into that space with calls, texts, questions or emotional pleas, you're not giving him a chance to move toward you authentic. You're just keeping the dynamic one-sided. The truth is, if someone pulls back and never returns, that tells you everything. But if you stay grounded during the pullback and they do come back, it also tells you something just as valuable. They didn't return because they returned because your energy pulled them in. So when you feel that moment of distance, when you're tempted to text one more time, when you're refreshing your messages hoping to see his name, ask yourself, am I doing this because it's truly what I want, or because I'm scared of what it means if I don't? Most of the time it's fear, and when you act from fear, you lose the very connection you're trying to preserve. A man wants to feel chosen, yes, but not at the cost of your own self-respect. He wants to feel like he matters, but not because you've abandoned yourself to prove it. He wants to know that when things get hard, you'll stay honest. And being honest in those moments means saying without words, I'm here but I'm not chasing, I care but I'm not crumbly, I want this but I want myself more. That is the energy that speaks louder than any text or gesture ever could. When a man begins to withdraw, there's a natural emotional response that gets triggered in many women, an anxious voice that whispers, something is wrong, he's pulling away. You need to fix this before he's gone for good. That voice doesn't come from logic, it comes from fear, and once it kicks in, the way you respond can change the entire trajectory of the connection. Because the truth is, how you react in the moments when a man becomes inconsistent tells him more about you and what kind of partner you are than all the amazing things you said or did during the good times. Men notice things in silence. When a woman is calm during his distance, it doesn't go unnoticed. When she doesn't spiral, doesn't chase, doesn't start over-explaining or over-apologizing for things she didn't even do wrong, that composure communicates a level of self-possession that is rare and incredibly powerful. It tells him something no words ever could. This woman knows who she is, she's not afraid to be seen, and she's not afraid to be alone if she's not met with the same energy. It's easy to be confident when everything is going well. When he's calling, making plans, being emotionally available, it's not hard to show up as your best self. But when that attention dips, when there's a delay, a shift or a sudden emotional cold front, that's when your real self shows up. That's when your emotional conditioning gets revealed. And for many women, that's when they unknowingly start to leak value. Not because they aren't worthy, but because fear causes them to act in ways that communicate need rather than confidence. You might begin texting more, asking if everything is okay, adjusting your tone to seem more agreeable, or even lowering your standards to seem more understanding. You start stepping out of your power, just a little at first, and leaning into accommodation. You tell yourself you're being kind or patient, but if you look closely, you'll often find that what's really driving your behavior is anxiety. You're trying to control the outcome of his pullback instead of simply responding to it with grounded awareness. And here's what happens when you do that. He feels it. He doesn't always consciously process it, but emotionally he registers the shift. He senses that something changed, not on the surface, but underneath. The energy between you no longer feels balanced. It starts to feel like he has the power, like he's being chased, like he's being convinced. And no matter how wonderful or beautiful or intelligent you are, once that imbalance enters the dynamic, it creates a friction that starts to erode attraction. Attraction thrives in mutual respect. When a man senses that your sense of peace and happiness depends on how available he is, it doesn't make him feel needed, it makes him feel pressured. And pressure kills the space needed for genuine desire to grow. That's the irony most people miss. When you try to force closeness, you unintentionally push someone away. But when you maintain your center, when you don't let his inconsistency throw you off balance, you become magnetic. Men are drawn to women who can hold emotional tension without collapsing. That doesn't mean you don't feel disappointment or confusion when he pulls back. You're human, but it means you don't allow those emotions to run your actions. You give yourself space to process, you reflect on what's happening. And most importantly, you keep showing up for yourself even as he becomes uncertain. You continue doing the things that make you feel alive and grounded. You keep pouring into your passions, your friendships, your health. You remind yourself that your life didn't begin when he started giving you attention. And it won't fall apart just because he's unsure about what he wants right now. That energy is rare. And that energy is what separates women who hold on to themselves from those who abandon themselves in hopes of being chosen. When a man sees that you don't chase him in his uncertainty, it triggers something in him. Not panic, not guilt, but curiosity. He starts to wonder, why isn't she chasing me? Why isn't she trying harder? And in that question lies the power shift. He realizes that your calm isn't a strategy, it's who you are, and that scares him, in the best way, because now he understands that he doesn't get to keep you by default. He has to earn you not because you're playing games, but because you're anchored in your own value. This is how respect is built, not with ultimatums or emotional outbursts, but with boundaries that are enforced through behavior. Your behavior, especially when things feel shaky, speaks volume. A man might not remember every date or compliment, but he'll remember how you made him feel when he was emotionally inconsistent. Did you make him feel like he had all the power, or did you make him feel like he was in the presence of someone who respects herself enough to not beg for breadcrumbs? You don't need to shout your worth. You show it in how you respond to disconnection, in how you give space without losing connection to yourself, in how you don't confuse love with control. The more secure you are in your ability to sit with uncertainty, the more deeply a man begins to trust you, not just as someone to date, but as someone he can go through life with, because life will have those uncertain moments, and he needs to know you won't fall apart when they come. And perhaps most importantly, the way you respond to his pullback gives you clarity too, because if you remain calm and he still doesn't return, that tells you he was never emotionally available in the first place. You didn't lose him, you revealed him. And that saves you from investing in someone who was never going to meet you fully. But when you do remain centered and he does return, he comes back with more respect, more awareness, and a deeper appreciation for who you are, not just as a romantic partner, but as a person. Because now he's seen how you handle emotional adversity, and that is what builds long-term connection, not just chemistry, but character. That's why your reaction during his withdrawal matters so much. It's not about being passive or pretending not to care. It's about standing in your worth. It's about knowing that your calm confidence is the real answer to the test he doesn't even realize he's giving. You don't win love by doing more, you deepen it by being more of you. Especially when it feels hardest to do so, that's what leaves an impression. That's what makes a man take you seriously. That's what makes the connection real. One of the biggest misconceptions about love is the idea that the more you need someone, the more you'll be loved. That if you just show how much they mean to you, how much you care, how deeply you feel about them, that will make them stay. But that's not how commitment works. A man doesn't commit because someone is willing to lose herself for him. He commits because he sees a woman who doesn't need him to feel whole. Someone who is already complete, already full, already rooted in who she is before he ever walked into the picture. This is where so many incredible women unintentionally sabotage connection. They confuse intensity with intimacy. They think that giving more time, more effort, more emotional labor will somehow earn them the place they want in a man's heart. But all it really does is create a dynamic where he starts to feel like he has all the power and she has all the need. And once that imbalance is felt, something in the relationship begins to break down. Real commitment doesn't come from neediness, it comes from wholeness, from the sense that two people are choosing each other, not because they're empty and hoping to be filled, but because they're full and want to share that fullness with someone else. When a man meets a woman who radiates that kind of inner stability, it stuns him. It interrupts the patterns he's seen in the past. It forces him to rise, because this isn't someone who will accept halfway energy. This is someone who could walk away at any time, not because she's cruel or aloof, but because she honors herself too much to stay where she's not being met. And that scares him, in a good way. Because most men have been in relationships where they were allowed to coast, where their distance was tolerated, where their inconsistency was explained away. But when he meets a woman who knows her value, she doesn't tolerate those patterns. She doesn't punish him for them either. She just doesn't participate in them. She doesn't try to prove herself. She doesn't chase clarity. She doesn't trade her boundaries for moments of closeness. Instead, she lets him choose to show up. And in doing so, she gives him the opportunity to rise or to fall away, and either outcome is information. This kind of woman is rare, not because she's cold or detached, but because she's clear. She's done the inner work. She knows that love doesn't come from effort alone. It comes from alignment. She doesn't waste time trying to convince someone to stay. She knows that anyone who's right for her won't need convincing. They'll feel the same level of desire to invest, not because she gave them 1,000 reasons to, but because her energy, her presence, her standards did all the speaking for her. When a man feels that, something shifts in him. He realizes he's not just dealing with someone who wants a relationship. He's dealing with someone who knows what a real one looks like, and suddenly the excuses he once used in past relationships, "I'm just not ready, I need space, let's not label this," start to feel small, because deep down he knows those won't work here. Not because she'll fight him on them, but because she simply won't entertain them, not with anger, not with attitude, with silence, with her absence, with the soft power of walking away from anything that doesn't honor her. It's not arrogance, it's alignment. She doesn't stay to prove her love. She doesn't overextend to show she's worthy. She lives in a place of emotional abundance. She already knows she's worthy. And so her love becomes a gift, not a demand, not something that insists on being returned, but something that's freely offered and can just as easily be withdrawn if it's not received with the respect it deserves. A woman like that doesn't say, "I need you to make me feel secure." She says, "I feel secure in myself, and if you want to be part of that world, you need to show up in a way that adds to it, not subtracts from it." That energy is what creates the environment where commitment becomes possible. Because a man needs to feel inspired to he needs to feel like stepping into commitment is a move up, not a trap, that he's gaining something, not losing freedom. And the only way he feels that is when he's with someone who brings peace, not pressure. A woman who isn't trying to get something from him emotionally, but who's already emotionally full. It's not about being emotionally unavailable, it's about being emotionally sovereign, so that even when feelings grow and deepen, she never confuses love with dependence. She doesn't say, "I can't live without you." She says, "I love sharing my life with you, but my life doesn't stop without you." That's the woman a man commits to, not because he's afraid of losing her, but because he respects her, because he wants to earn a place in her life. He knows that her time, her energy, her attention, they're sacred. They're not handed out to anyone who gives her mixed signals or half-hearted effort, and that knowing on her part is what keeps her centered. She's not desperate, she's discerning, and that discernment becomes the filter through which every connection must pass. She doesn't stay in places that leave her confused. She doesn't overanalyze behavior that doesn't match words. She doesn't put herself on emotional layaway, waiting for a man to make up his mind, because she already knows her mind. She knows what she wants. She knows what she deserves. And she's willing to walk away from anything that doesn't reflect it, not out of bitterness, but out of self-respect. When a man sees that, when he truly feels it, he no longer sees her as an option. He sees her as the standard, and that changes everything. Because now he's not just wondering if she'll love him, he's wondering if he's ready to love her at the level she deserves. And if he is, he'll step up, not out of fear, not out of obligation, but out of desire. out of choice. That's the power of emotional wholeness. It draws in the kind of love that doesn't have to be checked. It attracts the kind of man who's not looking for someone to save, but someone to build with, someone to respect, someone who's already whole on her own, and who invites him into that wholeness. Not because she needs to fill a gap, but because she has so much to give. There's a moment in every connection where things begin to shift, not because anything went wrong, not because someone said the wrong thing or crossed a line, but simply because emotions started to deepen, and with depth comes fear. It's often subtle, a few slower replies, a vague response to plans, an energy that used to be warm, now feels slightly distant. You start to feel the change in your body before you even register it in your mind. That invisible pullback from him can trigger an overwhelming need to do something, to fix it, to understand it, to bring things back to the way they were. This is where so many women fall into a pattern that slowly eats away at their confidence. Instead of recognizing that his withdrawal is his own emotional process, not a reflection of their worth, they begin pressing pause on their own life. They go into emotional waiting mode. The world doesn't stop spinning, but they do. They stop showing up in the same way for themselves. They cancel plans they would have otherwise enjoyed. They obsess over his behavior, play old conversations over in their heads, and spend far too much energy analyzing what they could have done differently. All of this happens under the illusion that maybe, just maybe, if they figure out the perfect way to respond, they'll get back the closeness they once felt. But what they don't see is that in doing so, they're handing their emotional stability over to someone who hasn't even made a commitment yet. They've surrendered their inner peace to someone who is still undecided. The danger here isn't just in losing him, it's in losing yourself. Every time you make your joy conditional on someone else's certainty, you dilute your own power. You shift from being the vibrant, magnetic, fully alive version of yourself to a version that's waiting for external validation before she feels okay again. And a man feels that it may not be conscious, but he senses it. He senses that you're no longer present in your own life. You're orbiting his, and that energy isn't attractive. It creates pressure, even if you're not saying a word. He starts to feel like the weight of your emotional world is resting on his next move. And no matter how much potential he saw in you, no matter how strong the connection felt in the beginning, that pressure starts to push him further away. But when you don't pause your life for his confusion, something completely different happens. You send a signal not just to him but to yourself, a signal that says, I choose myself, even when you don't know if you're choosing me. That kind of energy is rare. It's the kind of energy that doesn't flinch in the face of the kind that doesn't reach for false reassurance or chase after someone who isn't showing up with clarity. That doesn't mean you become cold. It doesn't mean you stop caring. It means you stop contracting in the hope of being loved. You stop shrinking your world down to the size of someone else's indecision. Instead, you expand, you live, you stay connected to the things that bring you joy, purpose, meaning. You keep building your life, not waiting for someone to decide if they want to be part of it. A man watches how you handle the space between connection and commitment. He watches what you do when he doesn't text for a day, or when he becomes emotionally quiet. If you react with panic, if you start needing constant reassurance, if you suddenly feel lost without his attention, that tells him that your happiness is dependent on his behavior. And that's not a responsibility any emotionally healthy man wants to take on. It's not fair to him, and it's definitely not fair to you. But when he sees that you keep living, that you don't pause your joy, that your sense of self isn't crumbling, he feels safe, not just safe to come back, but safe to relax into the connection. Because now he knows he's not holding you up. You're standing on your own. That creates respect, and respect is what builds commitment, not easy, not proving, not constant emotional labor. This is the moment where your self-worth becomes visible. It's not in what you say, it's in what you don't abandon when someone else pulls back. Do you still show up to your workout? Do you still spend time with people who make you laugh? Do you still pour into your creative projects, your goals, your dreams? That's what being high value truly means. It's not just about being kind, smart, or beautiful, it's about being whole. And wholeness isn't reactive, it doesn't disappear when someone else becomes unsure. Letting someone have their emotional space is a strength, not a weakness. It doesn't mean you're not invested. It means you're mature enough to understand that relationships aren't built in a straight line. They move forward, they stall, they stretch, they test. But the women who can hold their center through all of that are the ones who end up attracting real commitment. Because their energy feels different. It doesn't demand, it invites. It invites a man to step into something grounded, something stable, something built on mutual desire, not mutual fear. There's also a deeper truth at play here. If you pause your life every time someone is unsure about you, what kind of life are you building? One that depends on permission, one that waits for validation, or one that is thriving regardless of who shows up? When you center your own joy and keep showing up for yourself, you become unshakable. That doesn't mean rejection won't sting. It doesn't mean you won't have moments of doubt, but it does mean those moments don't define your choices. You're no longer making decisions from a place of lack. You're making them from a place of truth, and here's the most beautiful part: when you stop chasing answers and start living from alignment, the right people reveal themselves, not because you fought for them, but because your energy filtered out what didn't belong. The man who's meant for you won't be confused forever. He'll feel your calm, your presence, your strength, and if he's the right one, he'll return with clarity. Not out of fear of losing you, but out of realization. The realization that you weren't waiting, you were growing. You weren't begging, you were becoming. You weren't attached, you were aware. And that awareness, that's what makes a man truly commit. So in the end, it's not about how much effort you make, how many chances you give, or how hard you fight to keep someone close. It's about how unwavering you are in your truth, how deeply you trust your own worth, and how fully you continue living, even when someone else is uncertain. The man who's meant to be there won't need you to chase, to shrink, or to prove. He'll feel the quiet strength in how you hold yourself, and choose you not because he had to, but because there was never another energy that felt so clear, grounded, and real.